My son was a loser in school. That's the truth, and it's not easy for a father to admit. While other boys were throwing touchdowns on Friday nights or getting honor roll certificates, my son was the kid who came home with detention slips and failing grades. He wasn't the one teachers praised. He was the one they shook their heads at. It was the early 2000s. Maybe you remember those days, Blockbuster nights, dial-up internet that tied up the phone line, and kids walking around with CD players clipped to their belts. For many families, it was a time of opportunity. But for my boy, it was struggle after struggle. I'll never forget one parent-teacher conference. His English teacher looked me in the eye and said, "Mr. Thompson, your son just doesn't try. He's not going anywhere." Can you imagine hearing that about your own child? What would you have said if it were your son? And yet, deep down, I had this feeling. He wasn't lazy. He just hadn't found his fire yet. Stick with me. The next part will surprise you. When he graduated in the 2000s, it wasn't with honors. No proud walk across the stage to the sound of applause. His diploma felt more like a mercy pass than an achievement. Afterward, while his classmates talked about colleges, scholarships, and big plans, my son just shrugged. He didn't have a direction. He didn't even want to think about the future. Those were tough years. He spent hours locked in his room, headphones on, playing video games. Halo, Madden, Call of Duty, you name it. His mother worried he was wasting his life, and to be honest, so did I. I come home from work, see the glow of that TV through the crack of his door, and wonder if this was all he'd ever amount to. But one night, I caught him doing something unexpected. He wasn't just playing. He had stacks of old video games, sneakers, even a box of old Pokemon cards. He was photographing them with our cheap digital camera, listing them online on eBay. "Dad," he said, "I think I can make some money off this." It wasn't much at first. A couple bucks here, $10 there. But I noticed something I hadn't seen in years. Focus. He was tracking bids, learning shipping costs, even studying what sold best. He was failing in school, but suddenly he was teaching himself business. And then, one sale changed everything. One afternoon, I walked in his room, and there he was, staring at his computer screen like he just won the lottery. He turned to me and said, "Dad, you won't believe this. Somebody just paid $200 for that old pair of Jordans I bought at a yard sale." $200. Back then, for a kid with no job and no direction, that was gold. He was hooked. From then on, every weekend he was out at thrift stores, flea markets, garage sales, hunting for deals. While other young men were out chasing girls or wasting time at the mall, my son was negotiating prices over dusty boxes and old shelves. I'll admit, I didn't take it seriously at first. To me, it looked like a hobby, maybe even a distraction. But then I saw the ledger he'd started keeping. Every dollar in, every dollar out, neat as a pin. The kid who could barely pass math was suddenly teaching himself profit margins and return on investment. Isn't it funny how a man learns fast when it matters to him? But success never comes in a straight line. Just when it looked like he was on the rise, disaster struck, and it nearly broke him. By the time he was in his early 20s, my son had turned his side hustle into something real. He was selling not just sneakers and video games, but electronics, tools, even small appliances. His room looked more like a warehouse than a bedroom. Boxes piled high, labels everywhere. Then came the crash. A big order he shipped out, laptops he'd sourced cheap from a wholesaler, turned out to be defective. The buyers demanded refunds. PayPal froze his account. Within weeks, everything he'd built was wiped out. Thousands of dollars gone. I still remember the night he sat at our kitchen table, head in his hands, saying, "Dad, I'm done. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this. Everyone was right about me." Now, let me ask you something. If it were your boy, would you tell him to quit and get a regular job? Would you say, "See, this is why you should have gone to college"? Or would you remind him that a man isn't measured by how many times he falls, but how many times he stands back up? I told him, "Son, this wasn't failure. This was tuition. You just paid for an education most men never get." Now the question is, what will you do with it? He didn't answer that night, but a few months later, I found out. And it was the beginning of something bigger than either of us imagined. After licking his wounds for a while, my son picked himself back up, but this time he approached things differently. Instead of chasing every shiny deal, he focused. He noticed contractors, mechanics, even neighbors were always asking around for tools and parts, the kind of stuff you couldn't always find at the big box stores. So he pivoted. He started sourcing quality tools and hardware, selling them online and out of the trunk of his old Honda Civic. I'll never forget pulling into the driveway one evening and seeing 3 pickup trucks parked out front, contractors lined up, buying drill bits and power tools from my boy like he was running a mini Home Depot. He was learning to build relationships, not just sales. He remembered names, offered fair deals, delivered fast. Soon enough, word spread. By 25, he had a small warehouse and a couple of employees. And you know what amazed me most? The same teachers who once called him a failure started showing up as his customers. Isn't life funny like that? But the biggest test was still ahead. A contract opportunity came along that could either skyrocket him into real business or sink him for good. What are your thoughts? Share your memories in the comments. It was around 2010 when he got the call. A mid-sized construction company had heard about the young guy who always delivers. They wanted him to bid on supplying tools and materials for a project that would run for years. I'll never forget that night. He came over, spread out papers on our old kitchen table, invoices, supplier quotes, delivery schedules. His hands were shaking. He said, "Dad, if I mess this up, I'm finished. But if I get it right, this could change everything." I looked him in the eye and said, "Son, every man reaches a crossroads like this. You can stay safe, or you can bet on yourself. Just remember, the safe road never built anything worth remembering." So he took the risk. He negotiated with suppliers, stayed up all night learning contracts and logistics, and walked into that boardroom like he'd been doing it all his life. This was the same boy who once froze up reading in front of a high school class. But that day, he spoke like a man who knew his worth. And against all odds, he got the deal. That one contract turned his small operation into a real company. Trucks with his logo started appearing on highways. He hired a team. He became, in every sense of the word, a businessman. But the moment that meant the most to me wasn't the money or the growth. It came years later, in a way I'll never forget. Years later, when his company was thriving, he called me and said, "Dad, come by the office." I expected a quick visit, maybe lunch. Instead, he brought me into a building with glass doors, bustling employees, phones ringing, trucks pulling out of the lot. His name was on the sign out front. He sat me down in his office, poured me a cup of coffee, and handed me a frame. Inside was a photo of that old box of sneakers and video games he'd started with back in the 2000s. At the bottom, he had written, "This is where it began. Thanks for never giving up on me." I'll be honest with you, I'm not a man who cries easily. But in that moment, I felt something in my chest. Pride, relief, gratitude. Because the boy everyone said was a loser had become the man I always knew he could be. And here's the lesson I carry with me. Success isn't about the grades your kid brings home or the trophies on a shelf. It's about whether they find the grit to keep going when the world tells them they can't. My son did, and that's what makes me proudest. So let me ask you, has your child ever surprised you, proved everyone wrong, maybe even proved you wrong? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to read it. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more untold history and classic stories. And I'll leave you with this. Sometimes the boy who looks like a failure in school grows into the man who teaches you what real success is.